Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public hearing for the Land Use Covenant Variance Request for the Midway Village Bayshore Park redevelopment. My name is Asha Sethi, and I'm a public participation specialist with the California Department of Toxic Substances Control. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'd like to introduce you to the other DTSC staff that will be presenting tonight. We have Kim Walsh, who's a unit supervisor in the cleanup program. Can you say hi, Kim?
Good evening, everyone.
Thanks. I'd also like to introduce you to our hearing officer, which will be Lori Coach, who's a branch chief in the permitting program. Can you say hi, Lori?
Hello, everyone.
I'll give her some opening announcements to get us started. This hearing is being recorded. You've all entered in viewer mode with cameras and mics turned off. We do have Spanish, Chinese, and Arabic interpretation available for this meeting. Just look for the globe icon at the bottom of the screen and you'll find the languages to select there. And if anyone is in need of live transcription, please let us know and we can turn that feature on. Next slide, please. Next, I'll go over how to participate in this Zoom webinar. This public hearing is a formal process, which means that we don't respond to your input tonight. It's only a listening session. Your input will be entered in the public record and considered by the hearing officer prior to making a final decision. So there are two ways you can participate when it's time for public input. If you'd like your input read out loud, you can click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen and type your input there. If you'd prefer to speak, you can click on the raise hand icon, which you can also find at the bottom of the screen. When we call on you, you'll be able to unmute yourself at that time. For anyone calling in, there is a way to raise your hand and unmute yourself. And that's by dialing *9 to raise your hand. And then to unmute yourself, you'll have to dial *6 when you're called on. My colleague, Jerry Dietrich, is available to help us with any tech support if needed. In case we do encounter any technical difficulties, we'll have patience with each other as we all navigate the use of this technology until we can meet again in person one day. Next slide, please. I'll go over our agenda next. Our hearing officer, Lori Coach, will provide an opening statement. Then we'll hear DTSC's presentation from Kim Walsh. After that, we'll hear the presentation from the Housing Authority of the County of San Mateo. And then we'll conclude with public input. That's it for opening announcements. And now I'll turn it over to Lori. Next slide, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Coach. I'm a branch chief in DTSC's permitting division, and I am the designated hearing officer tonight. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to consider a variance to 3 land use covenants at the Midway Village Bayshore Park redevelopment site in Daly City, and to give the public an opportunity to comment on the variance request. The variance request was submitted to DTSC by the Housing Authority for the County of San Mateo on April 9th this year. This hearing is being held according to the provisions of the California Health and Safety Code Section 25223. At tonight's hearing, the county must prove that the variance will not create or increase significant hazards to public health, will not lessen the ability to mitigate any hazard to public health, and will not create a long-term increase in the number of humans or animals exposed to significant hazards that affect the health, well-being, or safety of the public related to hazardous waste. A decision about the variance to the land use covenants will be based on the application from the county, the information presented today, and comments received both before today's hearing and tonight. When the final decision is made, DTSC will make our decision available on our public Envirostore website. Late this afternoon, both parties requested various documents be part of the administrative record and that I take judicial notice of these documents. From what I understand, MidPen and the county do not have any objection to the documents submitted by Larry McDaniel on behalf of DTSC. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Then those documents will be part of the administrative record, and I will take judicial notice of the same. Mid-Penn and the county also submitted a number of documents for the administrative record. Does DTSC have any objection to the inclusion of those documents?
DTSC program staff is up to date and prepared to discuss the Midway Village Bayshore Park variance application. That's the subject of the hearing tonight. Documents that were submitted just before the hearing with a request for stipulation that they be included has not allowed DTSC sufficient notice or time to know why these documents would be considered relevant.
Okay. So we'll table this discussion to after the hearing when DTSC can review these documents and determine if they have any objection to them being part of the record. Okay. So let's go to the presentations. I'm going to turn now to Kim Walsh with DTSC to give her presentation.
Thanks, Lori. Tonight, I'll be presenting information on the project context for the land use covenant variance request, the purpose of this public hearing, and the legal framework for the variance process. I'll also briefly summarize the document list we're submitting for judicial notice. Finally, I'll present DTSC Site Mitigation and Restoration Program's summary of the effect of the variance if it is granted. Next slide, please. So a little background information on the project as context for the land use covenant variance request. In 2018, Mid-Penn Housing, a nonprofit developer, and the Housing Authority of the County of San Mateo came to DTSC Site Mitigation and requested regulatory oversight for a redevelopment project at Midway Village and Bayshore Park in Daly City. The Midway Bayshore redevelopment area is subject to 3 land use covenants. 2 of those are between DTSC and the Housing Authority for the Midway Village, and 1 is with the City of Daly City for Bayshore Park. These covenants run with the land and restrict land use. The proposed redevelopment includes land use changes and a new remedy to address contaminated soil gas and potential vapor intrusion into new buildings. Redevelopment construction would also require breaching the cap, which forms part of the soil remedy at both Midway Village and Bayshore Park. The Housing Authority acquired the Bayshore Park site from the city and has now requested a variance to these 3 land use covenants from DTSC. They've requested the variance because the proposed redevelopment includes a change in land use at Bayshore Park from recreational to residential use, and because redevelopment also includes demolishing and rebuilding the cap during construction. The variance, if granted, will work like a permit to allow the Housing Authority and their agent, Mid-Penn Housing, to do something different from what's required in the existing land use covenants, but with conditions in place to ensure that it's still protected. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this public hearing in simple terms is to provide an opportunity for the public to see the Housing Authority's proof that redevelopment under the variance terms will not increase the threat to human health or the environment or rule out further remediation that might be required in the future. This hearing also provides a forum for testimony from those with property rights that would be affected by DTSC's decision on the variance. Finally, the public hearing is required to comply with the laws that define the variance process, namely the California Health and Safety Code, Section 25223, and the California Code of Regulations, Title 22, Section 67390.2. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, part of the purpose of the public hearing is to comply with the laws that govern the variance process. California Health and Safety Code Section 25223 sets out 3 points that the applicant must prove at the hearing. I'm not going to bore you by reading this slide that provides the text of the Health and Safety Code, but I'll give you a moment to read it now. We'll also make the slides publicly available after the hearing for reference. Next slide, please. These next 4 slides provide the text of the California Code of Regulations, section 67390.2, which lays out the information that the DTSC hearing officer, acting on behalf of the DTSC director, is required to consider when deciding whether or not to grant a variance to the land use covenants. Again, I won't read the slides to you verbatim, but we are asking that the hearing officer note these requirements as pertinent to tonight's hearing. For this project, once DTSC receives the written variance application from the Housing Authority, DTSC was obligated to review available documents for the property and respond to the variance request by notifying the Housing Authority whether sufficient evidence exists for DTSC to issue a notice for this hearing on the variance application. That's why we're here tonight, for the applicant to meet their necessary burden of proof. Next slide, please. The hearing officer must take specific points into account when deciding whether to grant the requested variance. The first of these points is the hazardous characteristics of the waste that resulted in the need for these land use restrictions. Next slide, please. The hearing officer must also consider the factors that affect movement of any waste away from the site, such as quantity of the waste, physical state of the waste, and fate and transport of the waste in the environment. Next slide, please. Finally, the hearing officer must also consider the factors that affect potential exposure of any population within 2,000 feet of the waste. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, DTSC is obligated to review available documents for the property and respond to the variance request. DTSC Site Mitigation has prepared a documents list, and we have requested that the hearing officer take judicial notice of the documents listed. This slide and the next one provide a general summary of the documents, but not an exhaustive list. The document list has been posted to EnviroStore and is publicly available. The documents include the request for variance submitted by the Housing Authority and their recent amendment to that variance request. The documents also include recent DTSC letters to the parties to the settlement agreements from 2005 and 2008 that apply to these 2 sites, as well as some substantive responses to these letters to the settlement parties. Next slide, please. The documents also include the land use covenants, the draft remedial action plan amendment to address soil gas contamination, the previous remedy decision documents for the Midway Village and Bayshore Park sites, the DTSC site certifications, settlement agreements, and the most recent 5-year review. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to shift gears and talk about the effect of the variance if it is granted. When DTSC Site Mitigation began providing oversight for the redevelopment project, we learned through a series of site investigations that soil gas is contaminated at the site. So the proposed redevelopment cannot go forward unless we have a remedy to address the contaminated soil gas and prevent vapor intrusion into new residences. A recent indoor air study confirmed that current residents in the existing buildings are protected from vapor intrusion. The proposed soil gas remedy in the draft remedial action plan amendment cannot be implemented without a variance to the land use covenants. The proposed remedy requires vapor mitigation on new buildings north of Midway Drive, and construction would demolish and replace the cap, which is part of the soil remedy for the site. Redevelopment would include the new remedy to address soil vapor contamination. It would also include relocating Bayshore Park and raising the grade at the park. This would result in a thicker soil cap for the replacement park compared to the current park's cap. In addition, the redevelopment would mean new utilities would be installed. The excavations for utility installation and any other redevelopment-related soil excavations in the land use covenant areas would reduce the amount or mass of residual soil contamination at the site. Taken together, these actions would improve the remedy for the Midway Village and Bayshore Park sites. Thank you for your attention, and now I'll hand it over to the Housing Authority for their presentation.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Babs Steffenderfer, and I'm here on behalf of the Housing Authority of the County of San Mateo, the owner of Midway Village and the Bayshore Park. Thank you for presiding over this hearing, and thank you, Kim and DTSC staff, for your presentation. The Housing Authority is seeking a variance to the land use covenants on our property. The Housing Authority is a public agency that serves over 4,700 low-income households with affordable housing, social services, and rental subsidies. Your approval of this variance will allow the Housing Authority to redevelop Midway Village into a beautiful, affordable housing community. The redevelopment plan provides for greater protection to human health in the existing remedy, responds to community needs, and provides much-needed affordable housing for low-income families in the Bay Area. The Housing Authority has partnered with MidPenn Housing Corporation for the redevelopment of Midway Village. MidPenn is a nonprofit, affordable housing developer, property manager, and social services provider with a proven track record of having over 8,000 affordable housing units under its management, including 2,000 in San Mateo County alone. The redevelopment plan provides for MidPenn to be the long-term operator of the redeveloped Midway Village. Next slide, please. The project team and presenters are listed on your screen and include representatives from the project developer, our environmental consultant firm, and legal counsel. I'd like to now introduce you to Matt Lewis, representing MidPenn. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Babs. Good evening, Your Honor. I'm Matt Lewis, Senior Project Manager with MidPenn Housing. We're excited to be partnering with the Housing Authority to redevelop Midway Village and Bayshore Park into a vibrant, affordable housing community that will serve low-income families, seniors, and people who are at risk of homelessness, as well as other supportive housing populations. Midway Village is located in the Bayshore neighborhood of Daly City. Its approximately 16 acres are bordered by Schwerin Street to the west, Martin Street to the south, and a PG&E service center to the east and north. It's further divided by Midway Drive into two sections, Midway Village North and Midway Village South, which have distinct soil contamination conditions. The Housing Authority has been working on their redevelopment vision since 2015, and it selected MidPenn as its development partner in 2017. The site is very suitable for redevelopment and represents the largest affordable housing project in San Mateo County. Midway Village is now built at a low density, and the existing childcare center and apartments are in aging buildings. Bayshore Park is also in an inaccessible location and in need of equipment upgrades. The redevelopment project will include construction of up to 555 affordable apartments, as well as relocating and constructing a new childcare center for low-income families and a new Bayshore Park. There will be no below-grade improvements at Midway Village North or growing of food for human consumption in existing soil. Over 4 phases of development, the existing buildings will be demolished and the new apartments will be built in a mix of 2 to 3 story townhomes, 2 to 3 story walk-up flats, and 3 to 4 story apartment buildings. The new development will also include a revised street system, several community amenities such as playgrounds and after-school centers, and approximately 1.2 parking spaces per unit. No current residents will be displaced for construction. The 5th phase will include the site preparation for the new park facility and will ultimately be completed by the City of Daly City. In developing our plan, we did extensive outreach to the current Midway Village residents in a variety of ways. Midpen conducted one-on-one interviews with over half of the 150 current households and held 5 informational group meetings translated into 5 to 6 languages between 2015 and 2019. Other forms of resident outreach included newsletters and FAQs, in addition to official DTSC outreach efforts. DTSC staff have also made themselves available to residents and the community to answer questions as they come up. Midpen has conducted robust outreach to inform the community about the proposed redevelopment and to solicit input from neighbors and the City of Daly City. Outreach efforts in 2018 and 2019 included meeting with multiple neighborhood groups and organizations, doing door-to-door outreach within the immediate neighborhood to answer questions about the project, holding an open house in November of 2019 to discuss the project at a local elementary school, and having multiple meetings with city staff regarding the design of the overall plan. With our team at Craig Communications, we also worked closely with DTSC to assist them in conducting public outreach. We helped distribute a project-specific community survey to 1,729 contacts, including Midway Village residents, nearby neighbors, local organizations, key city and county representatives, and interested community members. Our team then held phone interviews with 33 participants in June and July of 2020. We've also assisted DTSC in distributing resident letter packages announcing indoor air sampling results to Midway Village residents who had their homes sampled. And we helped distribute a community update, as well as announcements of the remedial action plan amendment, public comment period, and the land use covenant variance public hearing. All communications were translated into Arabic, Chinese, and Spanish. Now I will invite Nicholas Targ from Holland & Knight to summarize our case for a land use covenant variance. Thank you.
Hello, this is Nicholas Targ. I only note that I do not appear to be able to start my video if the host can release it. And I believe that it's just been done. I'm delighted to be joining you this evening, hearing examiner coach. One of the reasons why I'm so pleased is this project represents the opportunity to create a cleaner, healthier, safer housing project, not just for the existing residents, there's no displacement, but also for hundreds of more people. I'd ask you to take notice that one of the most critical portions of environmental and health generally is to be housed. And this project and this variance will allow this to be done. I'd also ask you to take notice first of the application for variance that was submitted on April 9th, which is a complete discussion of the factors that need to be analyzed here, and I believe presents the case and meets the burden presented under applicable regulations and statute. I'd also ask that you take notice of the amendment to the application that was made on May 14th at the request of Unit Chief Walsh, as discussed in the application itself, in which she had asked for modification of the application to address operation and maintenance issues. and I'd stipulate that all changes requested by Unit Chief Walsh were made and have been incorporated. Therefore, based on the documents submitted, the excellent presentation by Unit Chief Walsh, again, I believe that the criteria for variance have been met. However, to review, three central issues need to be addressed. And that is, to meet the burden, we as HACSM and MidPen must show that we would not increase the significant present or future hazards to public health. As described in the draft remedial action plan amendment and well described by Unit Chief Walsh, the proposed remedy amendment would do exactly that. If the variance were granted, mass would be reduced by 2,300 cubic yards of impacted soil, vapor mitigation with institutional controls, establishing monitoring on an ongoing basis, maintenance, and the opportunity for conversion to an active system would be needed, and a superior cap would be constructed. Next slide, please. Further, HACSM must show that the variance would not result in diminution of the ability to mitigate any significant potential or actual hazards to the public. And again, for the reasons that I have stated previously, and Unit Chief Walsh has reviewed, it would meet that criteria as well. There will be a proactive vapor mitigation measure, which will be monitored and can be converted to active. The cap will be improved and enhanced, and an up-to-date operation and maintenance plan implemented by HACSM and overseen by DTSC will be put in place. Further, the variance must not result in a long-term increase in the number of humans or animals exposed to significant hazards that affect human health, well-being, or safety to the public by the variance. As I noted initially, the creation of affordable housing will significantly improve the well-being of residents. The improved remedy, including the barriers and the institutional controls and the vapor mitigation system will be installed, will further enhance and not create any diminution in the long-term impact to humans or animals. At this point, I'd like to turn over the remaining time to our environmental team, which is led by Debra Shipman, whose short biography is included in the materials that were previously submitted to this hearing. I'd ask that the expertise of Debra Shipman, who holds a master's degree, is a professional engineer and certified as a hydrogeologist, who has experience with no fewer than 5 naval stations and the rehabilitation and brownfields remediation in the Bay Area. Be recognized for the expertise that she has, garnered both by her academic training and by 30 years of practice.
Oh, thank you, Nicholas. So I'm going to go over a short environmental history, talk about the current conditions of the property, go through the preferred remedy that's outlined in the RAP amendment for soil vapor, and provide some additional rationale to Nicholas's discussion on us meeting the criteria required to obtain a LUC amendment. So in the early 1900s, the adjacent property, which is now the PG&E Martin Service Center, was the site of a manufactured gas plant. And in 1944, the Navy used about 20,000 cubic yards of soil contaminated with manufactured gas plant waste to fill the Midway Village site, and then constructed military housing. In 1978, the Navy demolished that housing and Midway Village was constructed. And the following year, in 1977, the Bayshore Park was constructed. So in the early 2000s and beginning really in the 1990s, DTSC oversaw the removal of 2 to 5 feet of contaminated soil from the manufactured gas plant in certain areas of the site. And those areas were then capped with clean soil and concrete patios, asphalt, or walkways. And land use covenants that Kim mentioned were recorded to restrict land use in those areas. Next slide, please. So you've heard a little bit about the current conditions, which include 150 townhome style apartments, again, built in the mid-1970s on 12 acres of land. The Bayshore Park occupies about 4 acres, and also included in the area is a child care facility. The current townhomes are built slab on grade. And as we previously mentioned, these areas where impacted soil is present at depth have been capped with clean soil or hardscape. Now, the LUCs require these capped areas be inspected annually and maintained where needed, or repaired if needed. And DTSC reviews the remedy effectiveness from these earlier RAPs every 5 years, and each time DTSC has found that the remedy remains protective. Soil vapor concentrations in certain areas do exceed human health risk levels, but indoor air concentrations in existing buildings are within the acceptable EPA risk management range. Groundwater is not used or allowed for use for domestic purposes, and impacts to groundwater at the site are few and isolated. And as indicated by DTSC approval of abandonment of some down and cross gradient wells at the Martin Service Center facility, these impacts have not migrated off-site. Next slide, please. So as previously mentioned, land use covenants for Midway Village North restrict land use to multi-unit residential only in capped areas. They also prevent and prohibit food raising, drilling for drinking or irrigation water, gas, or oil. And any disturbance of the cap or impacted soil requires notification to DTSC, and that activities be conducted with proper soil management as approved by DTSC. Bayshore Park use cannot currently include residential, hospital, school, or daycare. And similarly, any disturbance of the cap or impacted soil requires DTSC notification and proper management. Next slide, please. So this figure shows you the areas which are covered by those land use covenants. The 2 in Midway Village North, and the 2002 land use covenant covering Bayshore Park. Next slide, please. So with this new project being proposed, DTSC required additional investigation to ensure health and safety as part of a human health risk assessment. And the conclusions of that human health risk assessment indicate that additional soil vapor mitigation measures are needed in Midway Village North and Bayshore Park due to some elevated soil gas concentrations. That finding led to the preparation of the RAP amendment to update the previously approved remediation plans and address those soil vapor impacts. And the preferred remedy in the RAP amendment proposes that portions of the soil cover, hardscape cap, and fill in Midway Village North and Bayshore Park that are disturbed or removed as part of grading or construction will require that a new equally protective soil and hardscape cap be constructed in these areas as part of the development. Additionally, vapor mitigation systems will be installed under new buildings north of Midway Drive. And we'll talk a little bit more about the details of these systems, but they include both a vapor barrier under the building slab and a piping network that will sweep the vapors up over the roof level to dissipate in ambient air. The remedy will also include ongoing monitoring of the caps, as is done for the current caps, and repairs if needed, and monitoring of the vapor mitigation systems to make sure they're operating successfully, and monitoring of those systems. Again, annual inspections will be required, and DTSC will conduct 5-year reviews to evaluate the remedy effectiveness in perpetuity. As we've stated earlier, this LUC variance request is required for this remediation work and construction of the new development to proceed. Next slide, please. So the proposed remedy will be more protective than the existing remedy. As Nicholas mentioned, a significant amount of the current soil, the old concrete foundations, asphalt, and other hardscape will need to be removed and replaced with clean soil, hardscape caps, and buildings. The new remedy adds the vapor mitigation systems. And even though new concrete building slabs would substantially attenuate vapor, the vapor barrier and piping systems that are proposed will add a substantial reduction to potential risk. Additionally, utility trench dams will be installed to block vapors and where submerged groundwater from migrating along utility corridors. The land use variance application will allow for that cap removal and replacement and residential use in Bayshore Park. And following construction, new covenants would be filed with the county outlining the long-term management measures. Again, the ongoing monitoring of site caps and vapor mitigation systems and the need for repairs if needed, annual inspections, and 5-year reviews by DTSC to evaluate the remedy effectiveness in perpetuity. Next slide, please. So essentially, the new remedy continues and improves the original remedy. Impacted soil will be removed where needed for development and disposed off-site at appropriately licensed facilities. Approximately 2,300 cubic yards of fill will be exported, and protective clean soil and hardscape caps will be replaced. Utility corridors will be backfilled with clean imports, and this will provide a continuous barrier to human contact with remaining impacted soil. You should also note that all of Midway Village North and Bayshore Park, not just the existing land use covenant areas, will be covered with a combination of clean soil, landscape, hardscape, and new buildings. So more items to note related to the RAP amendment proposed remedy. To address those soil vapor concerns for future Midway Village North residents, the new mitigation systems for vapor would be installed, and they will meet current human health screening levels. They'll replace the old, what's now 45-year-old slab on grade concrete floors to provide a protective vapor barrier under the concrete slab with a network of perforated piping underneath. That piping network will collect and sweep vapors above the roof level of the buildings for dissipation in the atmosphere. And they're also going to be designed to switch from passive to active if needed. So in our professional experience, passive systems can very well manage these types of and levels of concentrations we find at the site. But if monitoring were to prove otherwise, a fan can be added at the riser at roof levels to help pull the vapors up and away from the building slab. So all these details related to the vapor mitigation system design will be provided in the remedial design implementation plan for each construction phase, and each RDIP, as they're called, will be approved by DTSC before construction begins. Next slide, please. So this slide goes into a bit more detail on these protective caps and reiterates some of the points we've raised before, that they will prevent exposure to buried impacted soil. But we did want to remind everyone that this practice of capping contaminants is very commonly used throughout the Bay Area, as noted in this DTSC guidance presented here by reference. And these capped areas generally will have the institutional controls as we've described here, including ongoing long-term monitoring and maintenance to make sure the cap remains protective. Impacted soil, where encountered, will be removed and disposed at appropriately licensed facilities. And we're going to talk in more detail here in a few slides about the measures and management procedures that will be in place during construction to make sure soil, dust, odors, and groundwater are handled appropriately. And what you see here on the right are just a couple of profile sections of both a landscape type fill cap and a hardscape type cap. As previously mentioned as well, the Housing Authority will be responsible for long-term operation, maintenance, and monitoring, or OM&M, under DTSC approved plans for each construction phase in Midway Village North and Bayshore Park. Next slide, please. And this slide shows a bit more detail about the vapor mitigation systems. And what you're seeing here is also a profile of such a system. Again, these systems are provided to prevent potential soil vapors from intruding into indoor air to address potential future risk to building residents. So you, I think, can see in the cross-section, crosshatch area is to represent existing soil. And you can see under the building foundation, there's a gravel layer, and the heavy dashed line is representing what will be the vapor barrier under that foundation layer. You see a pipe coming in, that would be a portion of that network of vapor mitigation system piping. And what you're seeing over to the right is a vent cap. These systems allow atmospheric air to vent in to help sweep the soil vapor up through a riser that would go vertically from the piping system and extend to the roof level to dissipate vapors. Again, these systems typically work very well passively. And when they're inspected, we check to make sure the air is flowing appropriately. But if monitoring were to show they're not effectively sweeping out the vapors, then the system would be turned active by adding a fan at the roof level to draw those vapors up and away from the building. Next slide, please. And what you're seeing over to the right on this slide is a spray applied membrane, similar to one we may use in this case. But this slide is really to provide more details on these specific plans that are being developed to minimize and reduce the risk below significance during construction. So I did mention the remedial design implementation plans, which will contain soil and groundwater management protocols. Each RDIP will have a community air monitoring plan, or CAMP, that is being developed per DTSC guidelines. Each general contractor, subcontractor, entity on site will also have a site-specific health and safety plan developed per OSHA requirements. And there will be dust and odor control plans, a noise monitoring plan, and traffic control plan to minimize impacts to adjacent residents. Additionally, there'll be a stormwater pollution prevention plan developed per EPA and Regional Water Quality Control Board requirements to prevent sediment from leaving the site or prevent stormwater runoff from leaving the site. There'll be a waste management plan and spill response and prevention plan as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about how these will be applied. Next slide, please. So we know that DTSC is especially interested in a 2,000-foot radius around this site to make sure adjacent residents and neighborhoods are not affected by this construction. So what you're seeing on this diagram in the pink is an outline of the phase 1 construction area. So you did hear earlier in the presentation that this work will occur in phases, and we wanted to give you an idea of what the size of these construction areas will look like. So this phase 1 area noted is about 3.8 acres in size. And you will see the current Bayshore Child Care Services Center is nearby, as in an elementary school is within what is our 1,000-foot radius, this blue dashed line on the slide. So we will have the community air monitoring plan, and that plan will have monitoring stations both within the construction area, and there will also be 2 up gradient, one near the child care center and one a bit to the south, that will be monitored for particulate matter, PM10. It's called total volatile organic compound concentrations, and when needed, specific monitoring of specific VOCs and PAHs. So the goal will be to keep the air quality below any exceedance or trigger levels established in the the community air monitoring plan within that construction area. We don't anticipate levels exceeding outside the perimeter of the construction area, but there are actions that would be taken with any on-site construction exceedances, generally working with the contractor to further minimize potential dust generating or vapor odor generating activities. Our dust control plan will have best management practices of reducing drop heights from excavator buckets, slowing truck traffic, making sure trucks are loaded appropriately below the rim of the truck beds, covering truckloads, and monitoring trucks as they leave the site to make sure they're not tracking out dirt. So we don't expect to affect the nearby community, and the community will have an opportunity to provide input if they do notice noise, odor, or dust and want to speak to someone, and we would take action on any of those complaints. But we feel we'll well manage near and in the construction area so that this 1,000 and 2,000 foot buffer area would not be impacted. But we did want to remind folks that, again, DTSC's 5-year reviews on the current existing remedy, they have deemed that the remedy to be effective at maintaining the environmental quality. And so what we're really speaking about here would be impacts potentially created by granting the variance and going forward with the project. And their 5-year review reports speak to this under the protectiveness statement in Section 8. Air quality will be managed during construction through the dust control plan and the community air monitoring plan, which are both discussed in Section 4.3 of the RAP amendment. And the number of truckloads estimated and soil volumes is provided in Appendix B of the RAP amendment as well. So those could be viewed there. Related to groundwater and surface water, groundwater dewatering or removal may be required where deeper utility trenches intersect the groundwater table. But removal of that water would actually decrease potential contamination or groundwater impacts, even though, again, those are few and isolated where they occur. So any water removed as part of construction dewatering would be appropriately contained and treated if necessary prior to permitted discharge or disposal. And surface water protections will be provided by the stormwater pollution prevention plan. So waste and accessibility to waste will be contained, accessibility to waste will be prevented because there'll be a security fencing and signage around the sites. Ingress and egress to the construction area will be monitored, and traffic control will be provided for vehicles and pedestrian traffic to make sure the community is not entering that construction zone. The proposed residential land use is consistent with the existing land use at Midway Village North, but is also discussed in the Sustainable Community Environmental Assessment, or SECA, that was provided for the project and reviewed by the city and DTSC. Additionally, there are no sensitive or critical habitats in this area. Thus, no offsite impacts are expected, but that is also discussed in the SECA. Next slide, please. So just a few more details on these protection measures that I had mentioned. And it's a bit repetitious, but the work areas will be fenced off with appropriate signing. Dust and air monitoring is going to occur upwind, downwind, and along the perimeter of the construction area. Water, foam, or plastic sheeting will be used to manage soil stockpiles and prevent dust emission and odor emission. There are plans to treat water if water is removed during excavation or trenching. Noise will be monitored along the project perimeter, and soil loads will be of an appropriate height, will be covered, and tires will be cleaned prior to leaving the site. And that's what you're seeing up in the upper right-hand picture. That's an example of one of a tire air track out preventer. And what you're seeing on the bottom there is a dust monitor. But again, flaggers will be on site to manage vehicle and pedestrian traffic as necessary. Next slide, please. So there will be ongoing maintenance and monitoring to protect residents into the future. There will be new ongoing monitoring and maintenance requirements for the new caps and vapor mitigation systems, along with 5-year reviews by DTSC to ensure that the site remains protective for future residents and the surrounding community. DTSC approved OM&M plans will replace the current operation and maintenance plans. Annual inspection and maintenance of caps and vapor mitigation systems will be conducted. Again, we've got the ability to switch the passive VMS to active systems if needed. And DTSC 5-year reviews can always request additional work if needed to assure ongoing protection. Next slide, please. So we've discussed the luck variance request, but just to reiterate, the variance is needed to enable the project to implement the soil vapor remedy that's outlined in the RAP amendment, increase the number of residential housing units, which we know is much needed in the Bay Area, allow residential development in the current location of the Bayshore Park, and relocate Bayshore Park, relocate the child care facility, resident serving community center, and property management office, which will all be within the project area. Next slide, please. So to reiterate the criteria that Kim went over early in our meeting, the amendment to a LUC must not create or increase significantly the present or future hazard to public health, must not significantly diminish the ability to mitigate any significant potential or actual hazard to public health, and must not create a long-term increase in the number of humans or animals exposed to significant hazards that affect the health and well-being or safety of the community. So on the next few slides, we'll just present additional points that support that these criteria will not be affected. Next slide, please. So in response to criteria 1, as we've mentioned, the new remedy will improve the site conditions by decreasing the amount of impacted fill currently capped. It's going to expand the clean soil and hardscape caps, replace the old 1970s buildings foundations with new concrete slabs that are more substantial, and have a vapor mitigation system included to eliminate soil and soil vapor risks. Community protection measures will be in place during construction and to minimize potential risks during the development, including proper soil management, odor and dust control, air monitoring, proper groundwater control. The variance will allow the proposed redevelopment uses with a modified and improved cap and vapor mitigation systems that will not increase present or future hazards to public health. And that is documented in the human health risk assessment that's been performed. Long-term cap inspections and repairs if needed, vapor mitigation system monitoring, operation, maintenance, and monitoring plans, and DTSC 5-year reviews will all ensure the remedy protectiveness. Next slide, please. In response to LUC Amendment Criteria 2, and not significantly diminishing the ability to mitigate any potential significant or actual hazard to public health, again, the amount of impacted fill on site will be decreased. The barriers to human contact with soil will now be more robust than with the existing soil having expanded caps, and soil vapor hazards will be mitigated by installing new, more substantial building concrete slabs with vapor mitigation systems. Community protection measures are outlined in DTSC approved plans and will minimize and manage potential hazards to air quality and surface water during construction, and will protect the community within 2,000-foot radius of the construction area. DTSC will approve engineering design level documents for each phase of the development prior to any grading occurring. And DTSC will also approve construction completion reports that will provide evidence of the effective performance of the VMS systems prior to occupancy. Next slide, please. And Luck Amendment Criteria 3 states the development and variance must not create a long-term increase in the number of humans or animals exposed to significant hazards that affect the health, well-being, or safety of the public. We do understand that even though the development would increase the number of on-site residents, again, the substantial new building, concrete slabs, and VMS systems in Midway Village North and the current Bayshore Park will provide a greater level of protection than current conditions. Mitigation and monitoring measures during construction will ensure the development presents no significant human or ecological health risk. Site groundwater is approximately 2 to 8 feet below grade. Impacts are few and isolated, and as indicated by DTSC's approval of abandonment of down gradient and cross gradient monitoring wells at the adjacent PG&E Martin Service Center, those impacts have not left our site. And if groundwater is removed during construction, it will be managed appropriately. It would remove additional contaminants if present and would be conducted under appropriate permits. And again, long-term cap inspections and repairs, VMS monitoring, and operation, maintenance, and monitoring plans approved by DTSC will be in place, and DTSC 5-year reviews will ensure remedy protectiveness. Next slide, please. I'm now going to turn it back to Nicholas, who's going to discuss the settlement agreement and NBAR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shipman. And if it may please the hearing examiner, I'd like to bring your attention to comments that have been made by signatories to a 2008 settlement agreement that also reference the non-binding allocation of responsibility, NBAR, which was included as an appendix to the RAP amendment, to the draft RAP amendment. With respect to the settlement, I bring your attention to the relevance of the settlement agreement. There are 3 considerations that are required to be evaluated for the grant of a variance, in addition to impacts within 2,000 feet. Each one of those pertains to environmental health, well-being, and environmental quality. How the parties elect to distribute costs among themselves, the potentially responsible parties elect to distribute costs among themselves, would not be one of the criteria that is subject to evaluation, and I therefore question and submit that it is not relevant to the subject proceedings. With respect to the draft non-binding allocation of responsibility, I would bring your attention first, Your Honor, to the fact that in 2012, SB 1018 eliminated the substantive aspects of the NBAR. The NBAR, the non-binding allocation of responsibility, was established for the sole and exclusive purpose of deciding whether parties holding 50% of liability would wish to have the costs submitted to binding arbitration. The binding arbitration provisions were again eliminated in 2012, making the NBAR something of an appendix. The 1995 Remedial Action Plan guidance document adopted by DTSC, which is still in place, and I had asked for the hearing examiners taking of judicial notice of the same, as it's posted on to DTSC's website as an active guidance document of the department, provides that it has a sole function, and its sole function is for the evaluation of liability to determine whether arbitration should take place. And once arbitration has been convened or waived, the NBAR has no further effect in the arbitration, litigation, or other proceedings, except in as much as the NBAR arbitration allocations is admissible for the sole purpose of showing good faith of the parties who have discharged the arbitration panel's decision. But it is not subject to a variance hearing such as we have here for the purposes of interest, although outside the scope and relevance of this proceeding. The parties are making strides in achieving agreement. Both Haxam and the Mid-Penn entity have recognized and acknowledged the validity of the 2008 settlement agreement provisions, which provide for releases of liability and indemnification. Beyond that, I have nothing further and appreciate the time and courtesy extended.
Thank you, Matt, Nicholas, and Dorinda. The Housing Authority would like to conclude our presentation by stating that we believe we have given ample evidence at this hearing that we have met the Housing Authority's burden of proof under applicable sections of the Health and Safety Code and Title 22 of the California Code of Regulations. Furthermore, by providing 555 new construction affordable housing units and associated services, the Mid-Penn Redevelopment Project will improve the health and safety of hundreds of families who will live at the community once it is complete. So this concludes the Housing Authority's presentation on our request for a variance to the land use covenants on the Midway Village site. We're now prepared to answer any questions you may have regarding our request. And thank you again for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, presenters. I'd like to ask Asha now to facilitate receiving comments.
Thank you, Lori. Just a reminder that this hearing is a formal process. And so that means that we don't respond to questions tonight. We did get a number of good questions about safety measures, cap construction, monitoring system, truck route, truck washing, and venting system. So we'll be responding to those questions later on. So tonight we're just here to listen to your input. So it's just a listening session. There's two ways you can provide input. If you'd like your input to be read out loud, you can click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. If you prefer to speak, you can click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. For those calling in, you'll dial *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute when it's your turn to speak. So let's see if we have any input from the public tonight. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A. Let's see here. We don't have any hands raised. So I believe we're not hearing any public input for this hearing, Lori.
Okay, thank you, Asha. So since we're not seeing any comments coming in, give it 30 seconds, maybe 15 seconds. Asha, do you think people have had enough time to?
Yeah, we did get a number of questions, as I mentioned.
Okay.
And there wasn't anything coming into the queue while the presentations were happening as far as public input on the variance.
Okay.
So I think, we would have heard by now if there was any interest from attendees.
Well, in that case, since there are no further comments, I will conclude the hearing portion of tonight's meeting. Thank you all for your participation. And Asha will share some further information with you on these remaining slides.
Thank you, Lori. If you'd like to access a hard copy of the request for variance or any other project documents, you can visit the Midway Village Community Center on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 8 to 3. You can also access project documents online by going to our Envirostore database. To get to the main page for the project, you'll type in Midway Village and select it from the drop-down menu. And then once you get to the main page, you click on the Activities tab to find documents related to the request for variance application. There's also a separate tab called Community Involvement that has information as well. We'll also post links to the presentation and recording online when they're ready. The next slide, please. And if you need any assistance with finding documents on Envirostore, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and I can walk you through it or provide you direct links to the documents. You do have until May 25th to provide us with input on the request for variance. You can send them to Kim or I by email or phone at our contact information listed here and also on the public notice. So that concludes our presentations. Thank you all for joining us this evening and good night, everyone.